Thank you, ladies. What a gift that was. Will you pray with me? Father, I pray that you would send your Spirit into our midst and into our hearts. I pray that you would use the words of your book to direct us and to remind us how very loved we are. Thank you for your endless love. Amen. When I was listening to Dixie tell the story, I learned some things that I didn't know that Dixie and I have in common. One of those being that it was her grandmother that took her to church, and not so much her mom. And that was the same way it was in my life. I was raised in a very matriarchal system. My mother and my grandmother and my sister and me, we did have a dad. I had stepdads now and then, back and forth. I had a grandfather. But it was really the women in the family that were the strong leaders. It was the women who kind of ran things. And I knew that when I got married that I was going to, have a very different home than my home had been. That I was going to have a secure and stable environment for my kids. I had all those plans. So when I fell in love, I knew that was what the goal was going to be. But some of our environmental situations do stay with us. And when Frank and I decided that we were going to get married, and we started talking about what we were going to do with the wedding and making the plans and all that type of thing, I said, well, what are we going to do for our vows? Now, I was all of the ripe old age of 19 and hadn't been to very many weddings. And he was studying in the seminary, or getting ready to start the seminary, and he had a brand new church manual for ministers. So he got it out, and it kind of went, that new book sound. And I says, I know the part about I do, but read me what it says before the I do part. He says, okay. And so he gets it out, and he starts reading, and he says, will you love, honor, and obey? I said, what? He says, it says love, honor, and obey. Will you love, honor, and obey me? Well, that didn't go over real big, because that whole obey thing was like, what? I said, we're not going to be using the word obey in our wedding. That's just not where I am. That's just not what I'm going to do. And it was the 70s, so it was all real good, because we just wrote our own vows, which was certainly acceptable at that time. Now, flash forward a few more years. My daughter gets married. She marries a man who's been married before, and he has a 9-year-old son. And we're just chatting about the situation. And she says, Mom, she says, Alex really likes to come to our house. He's really happy when he's there. She says, and I don't really know why, because we have so many more rules than his mom has. I'm like, rules? Is that bad? And I don't really know why, but I think it's true that in our culture, we think that obey is a dirty word and rules are bad. Now, when I was a little girl and I went to church with my grandmother, we had a lot of rules. There were a whole lot of things you couldn't do, and a whole lot of things you had to do. And my grandmother, if there was a list, I'm telling you, she kept every one. There was none of those rules that she didn't believe in. And so as I got older, I realized that's not really about Jesus. But then a few years ago when we were pastoring in Ohio, we had some people who went the other direction, and they said, we don't need any rules at all. And there was a big split in the church, and many people left the church. Many young people left the church. and never came back because they felt like we no longer need rules. And unfortunately, I meet a lot of young people today who have the similar view that a lot of those things in the Bible, they no longer apply to me. It's not important. And again, they have the idea that rules and obey, that is not for me. That is old school. So I decided that, okay, I'm going to do a little bit more looking into the whole idea of obey. So first thing I did is what would I do? I Googled it. You Google obey, you know what you get? Dog training. So that didn't take me too far. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get out my concordance and I'm going to look up obey. I thought we would start in Eden. Doesn't that sound like a good place to start, in Eden? You know, because everybody was happy there and God walked with man and everything was really, really good. And then they disobeyed, and it kind of explains why we're here. But you know, the word obey is not in the Eden story, so that didn't help me. The first story that has the word obey in it in the Bible is the story of Rebekah, who tells her son Jacob that he needs to obey her and put animal skins on his arms so that they can deceive dad. Yeah, that did not end well, so I kept looking. And so I came to the first time that God tells us to obey. If you open your Bibles with me, let's look at that. It's Exodus 19:5. The first time that the word obey is used in the Bible, and God is saying it. And he says in verse 19:5, if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my own possession among all the peoples. RSV says my own possession. The King James says my peculiar treasure. Okay, if you obey me, you will be, I don't like the word peculiar because that sounds like you have two heads and horns. How about the word unique? You will be my unique treasure. What other word you say? Special. Okay, special is good. My special treasure. Those are all good words where Jesus says, if you obey me, you will be my special treasure. Does that sound bad? Does that sound like something you don't want? To be God's special treasure? His unique treasure? I thought, well, that certainly doesn't sound like a negative. And something else I really struck me was the word if. If you will obey my voice. Does he say, you better obey my voice, and if you don't, I'm going to? Does he do that? He gives us a choice. You notice that? Because that's how God is. He gives us choices, which is part of what love does. Just give choices. And so he says, if you choose me, you will be my special treasure. Has anyone ever looked at you as their special treasure? Think about that in your life, where you felt like you were somebody's special treasure. Did you walk away from that like, oh, no, please, I don't want to be that? Did anybody turn that opportunity down? Oh, no, I can't be a special treasure. I mean, seriously, if anyone wants me to be a special treasure, I'm on. Here I am. I'm in. I'll be your special treasure. And God really, he offers that. To me, it gives me the whole idea of like a meaningful relationship, kind of like a bride and a bridegroom, to go back to my early illustration. You know, I'm hoping that everyone who was here a bride felt like a special treasure. And every groom felt like a special treasure. Because our bridegroom wants us to be that to him. But, God also was pretty clear in some expectations that he had for you to be his special treasure. We call them what? The 10 Commandments. But did you ever look at the 10 Commandments and really think about the fact that they are about relationship? They're not about, we call them the rules, we call them the commandments. We look at them like they're negative. But you look at them, they are very much about relationship. Go on to Exodus 20. Just flip over there for me. I know that a lot of you guys could tell me what the 10 Commandments are. Go straight through because you're smart like that. But let's just look at them and see what they say. Okay, imagine the bridegroom with me in the first 4 because that's talking about the relationship with him. Okay? The bridegroom says to you, I don't want you to have anybody else but me. Is that objectionable to you? Okay, only me. Okay, then he has a second commandment. He says, I don't want you to have any other idols, not even any American idols. Okay? Because he knew how we get distracted, right? All right? He said no. He wanted to be the one. The third one, he wants you to take his name seriously. He needs the respect and the honor that comes in a relationship where there is respect. So he asks that his name has that honor. And then the fourth one, he says, I want to spend time with you. And so he sets up a date once a week. Now, if you were in a relationship where this is required of you, are you going to complain? Really, you think about it. How healthy would our marriages be if we followed these same kind of things? And God says to his special treasure, this is what I require of you because I love you. And this is what will make our relationship strong. Then he goes on to talk about other people because he knows that relationships in our world are very important. Interestingly, the first thing he talks about, in the 5th commandment, is parents. Is it interesting to you that he doesn't say anything about children? When you think about it, he doesn't say, honor and respect your children, or love your children. Why is that? Pardon? Is loving your kids pretty easy? Is it pretty natural to love your kids? There are times when they make us crazy, but seriously, we pretty much love them all the time. He didn't have to command that. But loving parents can be a little trickier. Is that right, children? Sorry. And how about adult children? Sometimes as our parents get older, it's a little more challenging to love them. But he says, this is an important relationship. You need to honor and respect and connect with your parents. It's an important relationship for you to focus on. He goes down and he teaches about the respect of life. All life. It's easy for you to respect some people's life, and other people's life you probably don't respect them so much, and you think, But he says you respect everybody. Your words, your actions. Life is important. He goes down on marriage and says how important marriage is. That we need to focus our attentions on doing our best to nurture our marriages. Because that's where our kids are. That's where the kids come in. If this marriage is strong, it's going to be the environment you want for your children. He tells us to respect property and other people's property. Does that make for good relationships? Yeah. He asks us to speak the truth. How much healthier are your relationships when everybody says what is true? Sometimes that's hard. But that's what he asks us to do. And the last thing he asks us is to be humble and content. How many fewer troubles would we have if we were content with what we had instead of always wanting more? do you see how all of these things that the Lord put out there for us are relational things that help all of us have a closer connection, fewer differences, and a closer connection to Him? He thought it out pretty well, you guys, that these things that we are to obey keep us connected to Him and to each other. It wasn't just a random thing that He did. Very well thought out. So the consequences are, if you obey me, then you will have this closeness with me that I am so desperately wanting to have with you. But then we have to be fair. You've read the Old Testament, right? Are there some pretty scary things about if you don't obey? Yes, there really are. There are some pretty scary things in there about not obeying. But I want to ask you something. Now, we know that God, every once in a while, He steps in and did something really big, like the flood, right? Or like Sodom and Gomorrah. Big, huge motions. But if you think about the things about the people, most of the time, what you see is that it kind of turned out to be logical consequences. How many of you, when you were a kid, ever had logical, natural consequences play out from your parents? Because all of you were kids. I know not all of you have kids, but all of you have been kids. Give me an example of, I did this and my parent did this. Help me. Yes. Bill. Any idea? Okay, someone who wants to share. Janet.
My mother was smarter than I was when I was little. Because something occurred at a house that we were looking at where I went to the bathroom, put a bunch of junk in the toilet and things. And this was not our house. This is when they were looking at the rent. And my mother came to me and said, "Who did this?" And I said, "My brother." And I got spanked. And she pointed out he couldn't have done it because he wasn't walking yet.
Oh. So Janet told a lie saying that her brother had done the wrong, and she got spanked. Kind of a consequence. Anyone else? A consequence of something that happened to you when you did something that you shouldn't oughta have done. Any? Yes, Alvin.
I was talking about it this morning in the family. When Friday comes and I'm out playing when I should have been home helping to prepare for the Sabbath, I knew what was going to happen, and it was a strap,
Okay. Alvin said when he was supposed to be home getting ready for Sabbath, and he was out playing, he would get a strap when he got home. All right? All of us have all had parents who gave us consequences. Is this true? Was that because they hated you? Was that because they were very, very bad parents? No. And a lot of times, they say in education that consequences that are tied to the crime make a lot more impact on kids than random ones, okay? I had a 2-year-old who liked the color pink. And she had a pink crayon, and she went all the way down to the floor and high as she could reach, up and down and up and down, all down my wall. I didn't think it was as pretty as she thought it was. And so my 2-year-old learned how to scrub. Okay, not that she did a very good job, but it was the lesson that counted, okay? Because it was logical for her to have to clean up the mess that she made. When I taught school, I had students who liked to draw on my desks. You guys remember this. They would like to draw their own exquisite artwork on my desk. And when they did that, they would get an opportunity to clean desks. All of them. Because I mean that way. All right? Because of consequences, okay? You tie the crime, whatever they did, to the consequences. I really see God doing that for us. Okay? The Old Testament is full of stories where people have consequences. Okay? It works out not well for them. But if you look at those stories, okay, a lot of it's a very natural consequence. God says, don't worship other idols. And they do. Can he stay there and protect them and love them and do things for them when they are saying, I don't want anything to do with you? He steps back. He doesn't force himself. Remember, we said it's a choice. So he sends prophets. And he says, okay, my prophets will help you understand what you're supposed to be doing here. And they don't pay any attention to the prophets. They do horrible things to them. When the prophets say, don't go to battle, they go to battle. And they get slaughtered because they're not listening. It's pretty much natural, logical consequences. You know, God raises up a lot of heroes. We look at people like Abraham, Moses, David, Solomon. Are those guys pretty good? Pretty admirable guys. Do they make bad choices? Almost all of our Bible heroes, sometimes they mess up. Does God stop loving them? No. Does he stop using them? No. He picks them up and he says, you know, you're still my treasure. Come on. Okay? Even when they fall, kind of like your kids. He raises them back up. Most of the time, these guys just kind of reap what they've sown, which is a pretty normal pattern for things. Now, the most logical consequence would be, okay, for what these people have done, is for God to walk away. Seriously. Now, okay, I'm God, and all you guys have hurt me. And you don't listen to me, and you don't follow what I've told you to do, and you are hurting me all the time. You are not very nice. Logical consequences for me would be, bye. See y'all later. That would be logical. That would be natural. No one would blame God if he did that. Walk away, say, you know, I do a lot of counseling, and sometimes in relationships I have to say, the most healthy thing you can do is get out of that. You know, sometimes it's true. And it would be logical for God to walk away. Give up. Start over. Talk to somebody else. But instead of walking away, this is the most amazing part. Instead of walking away, he chooses to come down and walk with us. I mean, it is not logical. It is not practical. It does not make sense. But he comes down here and walks with us. And he walks with us for two reasons. First, because ever since Eden, our disobedience has separated us from him. And we need to be forgiven, and he needs to stand in our place. So he comes so that we will not be separated. Remember, we're his unique treasure. He does not want to be separated from us. He comes down to make that right. But the second thing he does is to walk the road and show us how to walk. It's why he comes to say, okay, you know, this can be done, and walk with me. And that's what makes the difference. So he is an example as well as a redeemer. Obedience was a big deal. Okay? I know that people tell you that it's not. You know, obedience is not, it's not that big a deal. God's going to love you no matter what you do. It's true. But he asks us to obey. And it's required, the disobedience required the very illogical and absurdly unnatural reaction that Jesus would come and walk with us. You know, if obeying wasn't important, okay, seriously, God would have said, all right, honey, I know you like that apple. I see that you ate it. It's okay. Just don't do it again. Right? I mean, if obedience wasn't important. But obedience was so important that our first parents lost their home and eventually lost their lives. And Jesus also lost his home and eventually lost his life. We cannot minimize obedience. It's something that the entire gospel story centers on. But it's not because God's going to get you if you don't do it. It's because you are his treasure. And he wants to live connected to you. I think my kids have sung about it in Awesome God. You may not even pay attention, you guys, when you sing it. But okay, think about the line that says, the Lord wasn't, help me, joking when he kicked him out of Eden. It wasn't for no reason that he shed his blood. That's what it's talking about. Obedience is serious business. Jesus had to die for it, you guys. Jesus had to die. And so it's something we need to look at very, very seriously. Not obeying is a big deal. But God's relationship was so important. His relationship with us was so important. He came down here and became God with us. Okay? Now, what was us like when Jesus came down here? What did us look like? Help me. What? Godless. Oh, darkness. Yes, darkness. Okay, and godless. There were people who were partying. There were people who didn't care. There were people who said, obey? I can't be bothered with that. So you had one side over here who were the partiers. But you also had another group over here. What were they like? Other side. The Pharisees. What were the Pharisees like? Okay. They were Sabbath keeping. They were tithe paying. Oh, they were so good. Right? Were they any more connected to God than the ones over here? No, they weren't. It's so important to realize that they were no more connected to God than the people that they scorned and made fun of and said they would have nothing to do with. God with us was with a bunch of folks who really did not care that much about him. Kinda like us today. God with us. So we have these people who are so righteous, and we have the people over here who are so unrighteous. Don't you think it would probably be a good idea when Jesus was looking at all those people there who were being, so proper and really not connected to him at all, he probably should have just thrown out the whole obedience thing, because they were just destroying it, right? He should just said, forget the obedience and just, come love me because, you guys are so out of whack. Does he do that? No. He goes back to the same thing that he gave the people back in the time of Moses. That connect with me. Connect with me. I still am wanting to connect with you. And you know some of these texts. If you love me, come on, we know that one. How about the ones that says, think not that I come to, destroy or abolish the law. I have come to fulfill the law. Now, I don't know what that means. Help me out. What's it mean to fulfill the law? Okay, the word in the Greek, when you look it up, it means to complete it or for it to be full grown. And what I think it means is that when Jesus said, I have come to fulfill the law, he stood in front of the people and he said, this is how you do it. I am going to now show you. We have told you, we have tried our best. I am going to show you what obedience and love looks like. Because you guys are a little clueless. There's some of you on this side who don't seem to care. There's some over here who are so narrow that you have not a clue. I have come to show you what it's like to obey and to live as one with the Father. I'm going to show you. And so he says, I'm going to fulfill the law. The same old relational things still go. They still matter. They're still important. There was another story about a rich young ruler. You guys remember that story, right? Okay. Very righteous. He was one of those with the buttoned, okay? And he did everything right. And he was so proud of himself because he was just so good. But you know, something was missing and he knew it. There was still an empty spot inside of him. And so he goes to Jesus and he says, what do I do? And Jesus says, what's he tell him? Sell everything you have and go give it to the poor and follow me. Now, was Jesus being mean? No? Oh, I heard you. Oh, yeah. Somebody thought maybe a little mean. Okay. All right. What was Jesus saying to this guy? What? Yeah, your fruits. Yeah. He says, don't just talk the talk. We know this is saying, it's very common. You guys need to walk the walk. You know, you've got to get involved. You've got to live what you're saying. Don't just tell me stuff. Don't just say, Lord, Lord. You've got to live it. You've got to change that you live your life connected to me. What does a rich young ruler do? He goes away. Sorrowful. Because he can't do it. I think Jesus was even more sorrowful myself. I think it was just a very horrible, horrible time for him. Jesus wanted his people to know that love needs to be lived out. That's what it's about. And he's the one who showed us how to do it. The scripture reading is from 1 John 2, 3 through 6, I'm sorry. 1 John 2, 3 through 6. This is just as clear as anything can be. And by this we may be sure that we know him. That's okay. It doesn't say we will be sure that we have a place in heaven. It says we will be sure that we know him. Remember? He wants us to be his unique treasure. This is how we get there. By keeping his commandments. He who says, oh, I know him, but disobeys his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him truly love for God is perfected. You see, it's not just talking about God loving us, it's our love for him becomes perfect. Because that's what comes when you live in a relationship with somebody. By this we may be sure. You ever want to be sure? By sure that we are in him. He who says he abide in him ought to walk the same way that he walked. You know, from the beginning, God wanted us to walk with him. That's what they did in Eden, right? They walked together. He wanted his people to walk with him. But then the relationship was fractured. Things really changed. The walk was interrupted, and there was distance between us. And so he sent Jesus to show us how to walk. He knew the walk would be dangerous. He knew that Satan would be waiting to get us off the path. And so he set up something kind of like guardrails. Anybody here appreciate guardrails? Let me tell you. A number of years ago, my husband and I were in Scotland. And if you want to appreciate guardrails, you drive with my husband. See how he always talks about me? Hope you're listening, Frank John. Okay. You drive with my husband on the wrong side of the street when he's driving on the wrong side of the car on narrow roads with no guardrails. I am not kidding. It was a life-threatening experience. And we were on this one road that was really very high, and you could look down and you could see the little tiny sheep about this big way down there. And it was like a dirt road. It was a narrow road. And there was no guardrail. And I'm sitting on the side that goes over first. Okay? And it was a rather frightening experience for me. And it made me think a lot about guardrails. Because in America, we have guardrails on just about everything. I'm sure not everything, but you're pretty safe. Well, I was feeling very, very unsafe. But I think that Jesus, knowing that the walk would be dangerous, knowing that we would have tendencies to go way to the left, where we could tumble off the edge and go straight down, okay? Or we could go way to the right and scrape up against the wall and completely lose the joy of walking with Jesus. He set up the guardrails to keep us safe, to help us walk with him. Because that's where the good ground is. That's what keeps us close to him as his unique treasure. That's why he came. Does obeying save us? No. No, it doesn't. Does it earn us brownie points with Jesus? No. But what obeying does is it bonds us together in a relationship that is not just serving out of fear or trying to do things to escape punishment. What obeying does is connects us to God in such a way that every day we realize, no matter what happens, that we are his special, unique treasure. Let's sing our closing song, because it's a lot about that. Page number 186.